If you want to stick around on YouTube, eventually you're gonna have to make a countdown. I usually leave this kind of thing for Oscar's channel, but we're not talking about video games today, so I guess it's alright. Instead, we're talking about one of my favorite things in the world of film, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's corny, it's self-aggrandizing, and it's far from perfect. If you're not into it, you have plenty of reasons not to be, but I've had a blast seeing this crazy experiment in multimedia writing come to fruition. Even if they're not exactly like the comics, which, yes, I have read and also love, I think the filmmakers and showrunners show a deep understanding for why people fell in love with the superhero genre in the first place, and I'm enthralled with the way that all of these properties technically exist in the same timeline, and yet for the most part they can each be enjoyed for their own separate and diverse features. For the most part, each show and movie stands on its own and invites newcomers, but for a mega nerd like me, there's tons of mileage in following the continuity. So here we are. Avengers Infinity War is just around the corner, kicking off the culmination of the first 10 years of intertextual continuity, so I want to celebrate. I'm counting down the MCU, the whole stinking thing. In theaters, television, Netflix, Hulu, you name it. Everything that's come out so far. These rankings are only based on my own opinion, which is maybe half critical and objective, the other half somewhat biased. So if you like something more or less than I do, let me know in the comments. I love talking to you guys. And just a couple of notes. I've decided when ranking the shows to treat each season as a separate entity, the same way you would treat a movie and its sequels. It seems only fair. I'm omitting a few minor things. There's some comics and novels that are technically in canon, but I really want to stick to the motion pictures here. That leaves us with a whopping 38 features so far, enough for this to be 3 videos, so today I'll just be tackling the bottom 14. Oh, and I hope you're caught up, because there'll be spoilers on some of the older features. I'll try not to give away things if I don't have to, but I know how you guys get with spoilers, so just be aware of it. If that's enough clarity. Articles, assemble! Marvel had a bit of a reputation for a while. The way people said it, they hit it out of the park every single time. That's maybe not strictly true. We have a fair share of mediocrity to comb through in this first video, but only one feature can be defined as truly bad. That honor goes to the first and currently only season of Iron Fist. Seriously, what happened here? Some critics say that it's a case of whitewashing and that Iron Fist was a stupid character to begin with, but I have to disagree. I love Iron Fist in the comics. And also, in case you don't know, in the comics he was an Irish American who had only grown up and trained in China. That's how he originally was. If they cast a Chinese American actor instead, well, I'm open to the idea. It could be a cool way to reinterpret the character and sidestep some arguments about appropriation. It's not like Asian actors are drowning in leading roles here. But let me be clear, this show isn't bad because it's a white guy. This show is bad because it's poorly written, poorly directed, and lacks its own identity. Look at the previous Marvel ventures on Netflix and how each of them had their own aesthetic theme. Luke Cage is an update of the 70s blaxploitation era, Jessica Jones is an update of film noir, and Daredevil is an update of, well, gritty Frank Miller superheroes. But Iron Fist is just more Daredevil? It seems like a no-brainer to make it a modernized 70s kung fu movie, and there are a few scenes here and there that follow that, but overall the show is just generic, broody New York wandering. Was there much of a budget for this? We never see Kunlun because God forbid they film on location. And the fight choreography is so disappointing. How is it so bad? This is Iron Fist. Martial arts are his thing. Maybe if you hired somebody trained in stage combat, the show could have gotten by on cool action scenes alone. But instead we get Loris Tyrell struggling to express a character. The show isn't unwatchable. Going into it knowing it would suck, I was able to enjoy some things. Colleen Wing is cool for a while, Madame Gao is always great, and Tom Pelphrey gives a surprisingly compelling performance as Ward Meacham, but these saving graces are few and far between. For MCU junkies only. Iron Fist may be the worst thing in canon right now, but it's not the last thing I'd recommend. You need to watch it going into Defenders, so unless you're okay reading a synopsis, you're kind of stuck with Iron Fist. Still, that's more incentive than you might have to watch Slingshot. Don't like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Well, here we have a web series spin-off of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The series focuses on side character Yo-Yo Rodriguez, who, to be fair, is a cool character on that show. At least I like her power, she's competently performed, but I never really felt curious to know more about her than the show already told us. Slingshot pretends it's here to shed new light, but it really doesn't. Instead, you're following her on a brief stint to get revenge on a man who killed her cousin, while also not violating the Sokovia Accord she just signed, since, as an Inhuman, she now has limited rights to act independently. But seriously, her cousin? Couldn't they have upped the ante and made it like her brother or something? We don't learn too much about Yo-Yo's relationship with her cousin, so there's no real emotion on sight. The villain she's after is the same kind of dog of war thug that you see on the show all the time, and the other characters from S.H.I.E.L.D. make token appearances that still aren't really interesting. I guess if you really like S.H.I.E.L.D., this fills in a gap between seasons, but it's not telling you anything new, it's not interesting to watch, and it won't add any dimension to the show when you get back to it. You can find it for free online and watch all 6 episodes in just half an hour, so there's not too much investment involved. It's like Yo-Yo's powers. It's over before you know it, and then you're right back where you started. I wonder why they even bothered to make it. For number 36, I'm pulling together the 5 short films Marvel has produced. These exist mainly as marketing material, and can be found on various Blu-rays and special editions of the main Marvel movies. Nothing really wrong with them, just not anything you'll enrich your life by watching. Unlike Slingshot though, some of these are kind of fun and probably matter more to the universe as a whole. I'll bullet point them real quick. The Consultant is a small scene between agents Coulson and Sitwell, mainly existing to fill in a plot hole concerning the post-credit scene in The Incredible Hulk. A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer is an insignificant sketch with Coulson, but hey, I like Coulson. Item 47 answers the question, hey, after the fight in Avengers, aren't there dangerous alien weapons all over New York? With a resounding yes. Nothing great since these 2 newbies never appear again, but it's a little interesting to look at this as a prototype of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Agent Carter is the same thing for the Agent Carter series, but with the plus of having Haley Atwell in it. Finally, Hail to the King is the most creative and worthwhile, following the fake Mandarin from Iron Man 3 now that he's in jail. Pretty funny, though I think it mainly exists to reassure comic nerds. Turns out there's a real Mandarin, we're just probably never going to see him. So again, if you love the MCU like I do, track these down, but they're not going to blow you away. They're more like conversation pieces. Winning the award for Least Likely You've Heard of This, WHIH Newsfront is more a clever piece of marketing than it is its own feature. If you've been paying close attention in the movies, you might recognize the station WHIH whenever a character is watching the news. This is even true in the TV shows. Newsfront is a series of web videos acting as an in-universe news station, complete with stories, interviews, debates, and exposés. Starring anchor Christine Everhart from the first 2 Iron Man movies. There's 2 quote-unquote seasons, if you will, of Newsfront, but since they each amount to 5 videos of an accumulated 15 minutes, I figure I'll combine them. The first set leads into Ant-Man, with stories of Scott Lang's arrest and interviews with Darren Cross. The second set leads into Civil War, giving us an idea of what the public reaction is to events like the Lagos bombing by Crossbones. Nothing to write home about, but it's nice to get that perspective. My favorite part is actually the other news stories crawling across the bottom. They're completely shameless references, but it's fun to see Stephen Strange mentioned more than a year before his film came out, and a really subtle setup for Spider-Man. It's total fanboy junk food, but I wouldn't mind if they did this for more movies. Problem is the rest of Phase 3 wouldn't have really worked for it, since the events either transpire in secret or take place on other planets. Still, I think they should come back to this. I'd love to get Everhart's opinion on the Avengers after Thanos rips up the planet. The opening episodes of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. are my definition of disappointment. The first Avengers movie set the world on fire, thanks largely to one of nerddom's favorite directors. And then it was announced that there was going to be a TV show? Directed by Joss Whedon? Canon to the movies? Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but the majority of the Whedoning here is being done by Jed Whedon, the lesser of 2 Whedons. Watching the first episode, it instantly dawns on you how much of a heartless cash grab this is. I was so naive. Not that it's horrible, Jed Whedon has done plenty of good work too, but here it's just a middle-of-the-road X-Files style show that's shamelessly pandering to people who've seen the movies. Hey, I love referencing the movies, but it's not even clever about it. It's more like, hey, remember Thor? The acting and writing are hokey, which worked in the Avengers and other Whedon shows, but here there's just not enough action, or identity for that matter, for it to land. What is this show? For a while it's us getting to know these semi-likable characters. They grow on you, but it's a slow burn. I feel like they're not allowed to do anything too cool. 1, because of the budget, and 2, because they can't do anything that shakes up the universe too much. They use some obscure stuff from Marvel Comics, but you can tell the studio wasn't sure what movies they would want to make later, so S.H.I.E.L.D. gets stuck with characters no one cares about, like Blizzard and Lorelei, who, by the way, is clearly supposed to be the Enchantress. Just make her the Enchantress! There's some cool stuff here and there. Fitz and Simmons are kinda funny, May is pretty cool. It's great to have Coulson back, and I really wanted to know how he survived his death by Loki. And Samuel Jackson for the finale? How the hell did they get him? Speaking of the finale, well done! The show reacts to each movie as it comes out, and as you know, Winter Soldier flips everything we know about S.H.I.E.L.D. on its head. The showrunners knew this was coming, so they actually got to pull the twist first. And the fallout is legitimately interesting. Later seasons would distance themselves further from the movies, which really is for the best. But for a first season, this was an okay start. I suppose it's promising that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.'s first season is its worst. A lot of great sci-fi shows are like that. After going from mediocre in Season 1 to surprisingly decent in Season 2, and we'll get to that, it was a frustrating return to form when we got to Season 3. A lot of wasted potential here. It's exciting to have most of Hydra out of the way to make room for Ward as our central villain. He manages to be pretty threatening, especially with the connection we have to him from Season 1. Skye, now known as Daisy, has come into her own as Quake. Mac is firmly cemented into the cast now, I like Coulson's new tech, and we have this cool looking monster running around called Lash. But despite how off the wall things are getting, it still manages to be oddly boring. You know what I think the main issue is? Every conflict of the plot boils down to will they won't they drama. Probably the showrunners saw how popular the Fitz and Simmons ship was getting, so they started this season by tearing them apart. You're rooting for Fitz to find a way to rescue Simmons, only for Simmons to develop feelings for this astronaut guy. May and her husband are growing closer together, but he's got weird new superpowers, so they have to distrust each other. Mac and Yo-Yo are cute, but let's have them alternate between flirting and arguing. Lance and Bobby don't even resolve. They leave to go be in a spin-off that'll never even happen. And Daisy and Ward, just no. Gross. Stop it. Also, there's Lincoln, who is just the worst character. Season 3 is notably the first time they do this two-half-season model that the show adopts from then on. Basically, the show has one major plot for the first half, and another for the second that's influenced by the first, but largely different. I guess that's good for keeping things fresh without fully serializing. I don't think I could care about one of these plots for 22 whole episodes straight. Might as well mix it up. I will say that 3 seasons in, I've grown to like most of these characters, but not enough to get anxious when they start prophetically teasing a character death in the season finale. And this who's it gonna be nonsense takes forever. Like, is it still going? Just kill someone if you want to kill someone so bad. I'm not gonna be shocked. I watch Game of Thrones for God's sake. This is child's play. What a weird thing that happened with the Inhumans. At one point it was planned to be a movie, which makes sense. Black Bolt and the city of Adelon are big enough in concept to warrant one. At some point it got downgraded into a miniseries on ABC, but with a much larger budget than S.H.I.E.L.D. So they decided, to kick it off, let's release the first 2 episodes in IMAX theaters, then put the whole series on TV later. What the heck kind of sense does that make? Well, I'm really glad I didn't pay for IMAX, but I think I liked this show. It certainly was a thing. The good news is, if you're a fan of the comics, if you like the Inhumans, this is them. They did not avoid how weird these characters are. That's Medusa, that's Karnak, that's Gorgon, and by God, that's Lockjaw. I'm so happy. Probably the best actor on the show is Black Bolt. This guy acts like a Moon Man, and manages some really intense scenes with only his eyes, which is good considering his powers. Most superheroes need to be powered down a bit when adapting them from comic to screen, but they keep Black Bolt's planet-annihilating voice completely intact. It's a lot like that one Fantastic Four movie. It's weird and really cheesy, but if you're okay with that, you might really enjoy it. But also like Fantastic Four, once you get past who the main characters are, you realize they don't really do a whole lot in the series. For various reasons, everybody gets their powers nerfed in the first couple episodes. They shave Medusa's hair off, I imagine because the animation team was ready to riot after the first episode. Lockjaw gets tired really quickly and can't use his powers for a while. Something's wrong with Karnak, his brain's not working right. Black Bolt stays quiet out of restraint, and Crystal, I don't know, lacks imagination? I'm not sure if this is the budget or because the writers didn't know how to create conflict with characters that are this powerful. For most of the season we have them scattered and weakened, meeting people in normal modern society, which feels to me like when they made a He-Man live-action movie. You know what I'm talking about? I think the show warrants existence just to see these weirdo heroes in the flesh. And unfortunately, this might be the last chance you get. The writers weren't exactly generous with sequel opportunities. Really, story group. You don't think there's anything interesting you can do with a superpowered king living in a hidden society on the moon? The Inhumans could have easily been a movie franchise. But I guess the Avengers movies are keeping the studio too busy. Only so many hours in the year, I suppose. Carrying most of my complaints over from Season 3, Season 4 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. gets a leg up mainly because the plot hooks are just more interesting. They're also really strange and comic-y, but that's kind of what I'm here for. The first half of the season revolves around the arrival of Ghost Rider. Oh yeah, now that's what I'm talking about! I'm glad Marvel finally gave them something fun to play with. Granted, it's not the Ghost Rider Johnny Blaze, with the whole collecting souls for the devil story as depicted so charmingly by Nicolas Cage in other movies. The show does make reference to Johnny Blaze, I guess so they can make a reboot movie if they ever wanted to, but here we get an equally compelling, if lesser-known Ghost Rider, Robbie Reyes, and they found some cool stuff for him to do. Meanwhile, a side plot in the first half of the season eventually grows into the second half's big hook: robot doppelgangers. Live model decoys, if you want the proper term. It's a little tedious for my taste. You have to deal with people secretly being LMDs and infiltrating the ranks, and an extended time spent in basically the Matrix, where all the characters have alternate lives and need to be convinced that the simulation isn't real. But Radcliffe and Ada are serviceable antagonists, as well as the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Jeffrey Mace, who is an interesting take on the all-American Boy Scout hero man. Of course, the regular cast is still around, and they're pretty good. They've gotten over a lot of their petty issues from last season, and it's much more entertaining just watching these guys deal with weird new threats. Still not a must-watch, but if you're in just the right mood, there's a lot to enjoy. Like, did you know that the MCU has a set of quintuplets played by Patton Oswalt? What's not to like? Daredevil Season 2 could probably have made it higher, but I have some long-held disdain for its shortcomings. At the time, it was the first chink in what seemed like an impenetrable Netflix bastion of quality. Season 1 was amazing, we'll get to that later, and Season 2 carries a lot of that same energy, but it quickly becomes apparent what made the first season good. And it wasn't the guy who plays Matt Murdock. A season with less Kingpin is simply a worse season, and in his absence you realize just how much he was carrying the show. Furthermore, Season 1 focused on the gradual defeat of this monumental villain and his criminal alliance. It spent its time developing these 4 other factions and make us understand the different opposition Daredevil would face, which came together as one big driving action. Here, there's not one, but 2 big plots happening simultaneously. These 2 plots have nothing to do with each other. On one side, you have the emergence of the Punisher, who is amazing. I never really cared about this character in the comics, but Jon Bernthal portrays a tortured and sympathetic figure without sacrificing the machismo that made him popular to other readers. Definitely MVP of the season. In the B-plot, or more like the other A-plot, you have the Hand, Nobu, and Matt's old flame Elektra. I have no idea how they managed to make an undead ninja cult in New York so boring. Elektra is fine. She's fine. But even when I start to get invested in this, it's weird that every episode Daredevil has to ping-pong from one plot to the other, constantly getting calls that interrupt him defending Punisher in court so that he can go help Elektra, then leaving Elektra hanging so he can go back to court. It's frustrating. And I know, that's the point. We're watching Matt Murdock's life fall apart because he can't stop being Daredevil. But frustrating story is frustrating. There's only so many times I can watch Foggy get disappointed with Matt. I love Foggy. I don't want him to be sad. We devoted a whole episode last season making sure he didn't disown Matt for this. But I kind of had to side with him, because every time Matt ditches him for Elektra, he's also ditching the way more interesting Punisher stuff. It's such a weird problem for a show to have. If parts of it weren't so good, the whole would probably be better. As is, it's like watching a really gorgeous Corvette crashing slow motion into a train. We finally get a movie on this list. The one we ignore from canon, which is maybe a little unfair. We probably wouldn't dismiss this movie so quickly, except Banner was recast as Mark Ruffalo after this, and pretty much reintroduced into canon in the Avengers. You could skip this movie and have perfect understanding of the Hulk from other appearances. You'll miss nothing. But that's not the main thing working against this movie. It hadn't been a long time since the last attempt to put the mean green on the silver screen. For some people, it's hard to even keep those movies separate. Part of this is intentional. The writers set Incredible Hulk a bit later in Bruce Banner's story, post-transformation, so that if you wanted, you could pretend that this was a sequel. This way it avoids problems some of us had when discarding Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man for the new Tom Holland Spider-Man. But how about the movie itself? It's okay. It lacks any memorable scenes of its own, and the performances, though capable, don't make it anything you need to see over Marvel's other films. But that's the interesting thing about this movie. It's the last superhero movie before the game changed. It's not structured like the now tried and true formula movies Marvel produces, and it doesn't have the set pieces of even the DC competition. It handles its property more like Fantastic Four, the older X-Men, Ben Affleck Daredevil, or for a more successful example, Sam Raimi Spider-Man. It's not trying to hold up a behemoth franchise yet, just sell a movie, sell some toys, and not screw it up too much in case this nifty Avengers project works out. Post-credit scene aside, it's standing on its own 2 feet here, not part of the multi-movie empire. Just watch this movie and focus on the tone, you'll see exactly what I mean. Kind of bland, lots of dropped plot threads we're never picking up. No, that is not Amadeus Cho, I don't care what the novelization says. But it's nice to see a superhero movie of a bygone era, even if I'm glad we moved on. For example, we learned that not every hero has to be a generic handsome guy. Some can also be Mark Ruffalo. Skip it if you want, watch it if you want, we'll take Thunderbolt Ross out and forget the rest. Wait. Is that Phil Dunphy as Doc Samson? Never mind, follow that up. Give him powers, I want to see that sequel. In another case of we'll talk about it later, Agent Carter Season 1 was really good. I remember yelling at the world when this show was cancelled after only its 2nd season, but when really examining the 2nd season, I can see why. It's not so much a comparative issue like the first 2 seasons of Daredevil. Carter 2 just doesn't hit the mark like Carter 1 does. I still love these characters, whom I'd prefer to talk about when we get to ranking Season 1. Season 1 was just a great self-contained story with a beginning and an end. this season is little more than a detour, leading Carter closer to starting S.H.I.E.L.D., which we know she's gonna do anyway, and it's a bit more background for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The new villain is interesting. I'm always down for the show having women who just don't want to be controlled anymore. Oh, and Jarvis's wife is amazing. Season 2 continues the plucky humor, the great woman empowerment, and the rich 1940s flavor, not to mention fantastic snark from the ever-wonderful Hayley Atwell. And that's all I have to say. Nothing really wrong with it, just, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the quality average. I believe surprisingly decent is the phrase I used earlier. Now that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. introduced its characters, we can finally have some fun with them in Season 2. After the fallout of Winter Soldier, S.H.I.E.L.D's much less omnipresent now than in Phase 1, which helps the series stay out of the way of the films. Season 2 comes out swinging with a well-done portrayal of the Absorbing Man, I love that guy, and just keeps the ball rolling, introducing Inhumans to the cinematic universe, building on the Kree mystery, bringing in some new members that might not be too trustworthy, following Fitz in his heartbreaking struggle with long-term brain damage, and Skye, maybe one of the biggest misses for me in Season 1, turns out to have been Daisy Johnson from the comics all along. You see, we never knew her birth name before, so nerds couldn't ID her as Quake right away. Clever series. And this season is the most I ever liked her, which is good considering that she's kind of the main character. It reveals her powers, her backstory, and that happens to include some cool Inhuman designs. It's really nice that things can actually happen in this show now, and it outshines Season 4 with some deceptively emotional scenes, especially concerning minor comic villain Mr. Hyde, who has more nuance in this show than he has any right to. So, is this as good as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. gets? Maybe. I don't really know yet. Season 5 is, as of right now, incomplete, and won't be resolving until after Infinity War has already come out. But they've already completed the first plot arc, and I can say it about ties with Season 2, though for pretty different reasons. As I said with Season 4, at this point I care less about developing these characters and more about watching them deal with weird situations. Though the occasional great character moment does arise, usually from Fitz and Simmons, or in this case a tearjerker scene from May that I never knew I wanted but completely aligns with everything her character has been through so far. Holy crap, it's so smart! As for the situation itself, it's the biggest departure the series has had yet. Agents in space! And what above all, they're messing with time travel now. Your continuity with the movies is fragile enough as it is, please don't do this! But the brand new environment brings a breath of fresh air, imposing Kree to defeat, and evocative sci-fi politics to navigate. The isolated setting makes this arc feel nicely contained, like the vacuum-sealed space station it is. It certainly beats staying on Earth and doing another Enemies of the State storyline. I was dreading that at the end of Season 4. Same great cast, new and improved world. If they can stick the landing, it will be a high point for this odd curio of a series. Until then, I'm just glad I don't have to type this show's title anymore. S.H.I. Finishing up today, we have the first season of The Defenders, which I'm hoping won't be the last. A big crossover bash for Netflix the same way The Avengers was for the movie, Defenders didn't really work the same way Marvel wanted it to. I think it's good, just not greater than the sum of its parts, which, let's be fair, some of these parts are pretty whole to begin with. Maybe the writers bet on the wrong horse when picking their villain. By the time they realized nobody cares about the Hand, it was too late to make this season about anything else. But this show succeeds in the most important area it could have. It brings these characters together and the personalities work great off each other. All four of the leads are multifaceted and interesting. Even Iron Fist got markedly more bearable. I think the Iron Fist show was aiming for the more serious "my parents are dead" broody Iron Fist. Here he's more the jokey heroes for hire Iron Fist, which is the far superior Iron Fist. I love the fact that the rest of the group can barely stand him either, which actually makes him a lot more sufferable. You can put any two of these guys in a room and get a great exchange out of it. I love how Daredevil is the only one with a secret identity. Everyone else is like, what the hell are you doing? And maybe it's a little sad that the two most interesting heroes, Luke and Jessica, had the least to do with the plot, but every line they have in this show they're just owning constantly. Now that Elektra is part of the Hand, it's the most interesting it's ever been. There's finally some human element to them. And even outside of the main four heroes, Colleen, Misty, and Claire get some great fight scenes. Is it the Avengers of Netflix? No, not in terms of quality. It doesn't have the fun of the Avengers or the meaty issues of the individual shows, but I'm still overjoyed to see this gang together. Well, that's 14 down, 24 to go. Hope you'll stick around. I'll have part 2 out real soon and we'll finally get to see some movies. Well, the movies people care about anyway. So Hulk smash that subscribe button and I'll see you in the next issue. This is your friendly neighborhood ComicFoil, signing off.